The night the aliens did not invade, they arrived to judge humanity. The night the aliens arrived, the world did not end in fire. There were no explosions. No screams from the sky. No burning cities or collapsing towers. Instead, there was silence, a silence so deep it made people stop breathing for a moment, as if the planet itself had paused to listen. Across Earth, every screen went black at the same time. Phones, televisions, billboards, satellites, military monitors, space stations, all went dark. Even the stars seemed to dim, as if someone had gently lowered the brightness of the universe. Then a single message appeared. Not in one language, but in all of them at once. Do not be afraid. We are not here to conquer you. We are here to judge you. No one knew where the message came from. It had no signal source. No frequency. No code that human systems could trace. It simply was. For 10 seconds, the world did not move. Then everything broke. In New York, traffic froze as drivers stared at their dashboards. In Tokyo, commuters dropped their phones on crowded platforms. In small villages, people fell to their knees, whispering prayers they hadn't spoken in years. Governments tried to speak, but their words sounded small and powerless. Emergency broadcasts failed. Military systems refused commands. Nuclear arsenals locked themselves behind codes no human had written. Humanity realized something terrifying. They were no longer in control of their own world. Above the atmosphere, something massive unfolded. Not a ship, not a fleet, but a shape that bent light itself. It wasn't metal or fire. It looked like a moving idea, a shadow made of geometry and thought. Satellites captured only fragments before losing signal forever. And then, the voice returned. You have been observed for a long time. Dr. Elia Marino stood in the ruins of a university observatory in Chile, staring at the sky. She was an astrophysicist, a woman who believed in math, evidence, and equations that balanced. She had spent her life searching for intelligent life in the cosmos. She never imagined it would come with a verdict. Her laptop flickered back on without her touching it. A single line appeared. Observer Node 7 online. Subject, Earth. She whispered, You're watching us. The response came instantly. We have always been watching. Across the world, similar conversations began. Not with leaders or generals, but with ordinary people, teachers, farmers, children, nurses, artists. The aliens did not choose power. They chose perspective. In a small apartment in Cairo, a teacher named Amina found her mirror speaking to her. In a fishing village in Norway, an old man heard the ocean speak his name. In a prison cell in Brazil, a man serving a life sentence felt the walls dissolve into light. Every message was different, yet all carried the same meaning. Humanity was being evaluated. The aliens called themselves the Continuum. They were not a species in the way humans understood species. They were a civilization that had passed beyond bodies, beyond planets, beyond time-bound existence. They had once been like humans, divided, violent, hopeful, cruel, and they had survived themselves. Not all civilizations did. The Continuum had seen thousands of intelligent worlds rise and fall. Some burned themselves out with war. Some poisoned their own skies. Some built gods from machines and were consumed by them. Earth had reached what they called the threshold. A point where a species could no longer evolve without destroying itself. World leaders gathered in secret digital chambers, trying to regain control. But the aliens did not ask permission. Instead, they broadcast one final global message. You believe judgment comes with punishment. That is a human idea. We judge to decide whether to intervene or to walk away. The message ended with a timer. 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days for humanity to show who they truly were. At first, chaos ruled. Markets collapsed within minutes. Some people looted. Others prayed. Some laughed hysterically, convinced it was a trick or a mass hallucination. But slowly, something else began to emerge. Choice. In one city, doctors refused to abandon their patients even when hospitals lost power. In another, strangers shared food instead of hoarding it. In war zones, guns went silent. Not everywhere, but enough to be noticed. And yet, darkness remained. Corporations tried to hide data. Governments attempted secret countermeasures. Militias declared the aliens demons. A few nations prepared to launch weapons into the sky, despite knowing it would mean nothing. The Continuum watched everything. On the second night, the sky changed color. Not red. Not blue. It became deep, like an endless ocean of thought. Stars rearranged themselves into patterns that made people cry without knowing why. A new message appeared. You believe you are judged for your worst acts. You are not. You are judged by what you protect when no one is watching. That night, something strange happened. People began to remember. Not memories from their lives, but memories of humanity itself. Ancient moments. Shared pain. Shared wonder. A woman in India remembered the first fire. A boy in Canada felt the fear of the first human who looked up at lightning. An old man in Kenya felt the joy of planting the first seed. The aliens were not showing them history. They were showing them connection. Dr. Moreno collapsed to her knees as understanding struck her. They are not here to conquer us, she whispered. They are here to see if we're worth saving from ourselves. Her screen lit again. Your species stands at the edge of extinction by its own hand. We do not save those who refuse to change. We only preserve those who choose to become more. The timer continued to count down. 48 hours, 13 minutes and 22 seconds. In the streets, something remarkable began to spread. Not peace. Responsibility. People started choosing differently, not because they were told to, but because they were being seen. A soldier lowered his weapon. A CEO leaked evidence of corruption. A mother forgave a son she had not spoken to in years. Not everyone changed. Some doubled down on hate. Some tried to exploit the moment. Some prayed for the aliens to destroy their enemies. The Continuum watched all of it. Silently. Patiently. As the second day ended, a final message appeared across the world. Tomorrow, judgment ends. Not with destruction. With a decision. The sky dimmed again. And humanity waited to learn whether it would be allowed to continue its story. Or become another forgotten species in the long memory of the universe. The second day began without a sunrise. The sun was there, burning behind the sky, but its light reached Earth strangely muted, as if passing through a veil of thought instead of air. Shadows stretched longer than they should. Colors felt quieter. Even sound seemed to hesitate before reaching the ear. Across the world, people woke with the same uneasy feeling, that they were no longer alone inside their own minds. Dr. Elia Moreno sat on the cold floor of the observatory, her back against the wall, eyes fixed on the floating symbols that had replaced the stars. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt something listening. Not invading. Not judging yet. Just aware. Her console chimed softly. Observer Node 7 requesting dialogue. She swallowed and whispered, I'm listening. The air in front of her folded inward, like space taking a breath. A shape formed. Not solid, not light, but an outline of intention. You seek to understand us, it said. I do, she replied. But more than that, I want to understand us. There was a pause. Then, that is why you were chosen. All across Earth, the same thing was happening. The Continuum did not appear to rulers or celebrities or generals. They appeared to people who had questioned themselves, who had doubted their own goodness, who had wondered if humanity could be better. A nurse in Manila. A refugee teacher in Greece. A coder in Lagos. A farmer in Argentina. Each was given a single conversation. Each conversation was different. But all led to the same truth. Your species believes judgment is punishment, the Continuum told Elia. That belief shaped your laws, your gods, your wars. Elia clenched her fists. Then what is judgment to you? A pause. A shift in the air. Judgment is measurement. Images filled her mind. Civilizations blooming like stars, then collapsing into ash. Some consumed their worlds. Some transcended them. Some simply faded, forgotten even by time. We measure not intelligence, but wisdom. Not power, but restraint. Not survival, but stewardship. Elia felt her chest tighten. And how do we measure up? The answer did not come immediately. On the streets of Berlin, a protest turned into a vigil. People sat together in silence, holding candles they didn't need for light. A child asked his mother if the aliens were angels. She didn't know how to answer. In Moscow, a general stared at a disabled missile console, his reflection staring back at him like an accusation. In a hospital in Nairobi, a dying man smiled as the pain faded, whispering, "So this is what being seen feels like." Across the world, humanity was being forced to confront itself, without excuses, without distance, without lies. Then the second message came. You believe your violence defines you. It does not. People everywhere stopped what they were doing. Violence is a symptom, not a cause. Fear is the disease. Images appeared, not of wars, but of moments before them. Hunger, humiliation, abandonment, silence. You fear being forgotten. You fear being alone. You fear that your lives mean nothing. The message softened. So you take. You conquer. You shout. A long pause. But fear is not destiny. Dr. Moreno felt tears slide down her face. She thought of her father, who had taught her to love the stars but never said he loved her. Of her mother, who died believing her work didn't matter. She whispered, "We're trying. We really are." The presence shifted, as if considering her words. "Yes," it said. "That is why the judgment has not ended." The second night fell differently. The sky began to reflect human memories, not individually, but collectively. People saw visions overlapping reality, ancient fires, shared laughter, hands reaching across centuries. Some saw shame. Some saw hope. Most saw both. And something else emerged. For the first time in history, humanity could not lie to itself. Every excuse, every justification, every denial peeled away. There was no enemy to blame. Only choice. In a small town, a group of teenagers broke into a store, then stopped. One of them started crying, dropping what he held. "I don't want to be this person," he said. They left the store and cleaned it instead. In a border zone that had burned for decades, soldiers lowered their weapons without orders. They didn't embrace. They didn't forgive. But they stopped firing. That alone felt like a miracle. The Continuum observed everything. "Your species stands at a crossroads," they declared. "One path leads forward. One leads to silence." A massive symbol appeared in the sky, not a threat, but a question. Two lines diverging. No instructions. No commands. Only choice. Dr. Moreno felt the weight of it settle into her bones. "You're not deciding for us," she realized. "You never were." "Correct." Then what happens when the timer ends? For the first time, the voice hesitated. "Then we will know whether to stay or to grieve." The countdown appeared again in every mind. Midnight. 1 day left. Humanity stood on the edge of its own reflection, unsure whether it would step forward or turn away. The final day began without warning. No sound marked it. No announcement. No new message carved itself into the sky. And yet, everyone knew. It settled into the bones of the world like a quiet ache. 24 hours remained. The sky no longer looked like sky. It had become a mirror, deep, endless, reflecting thoughts instead of light. Clouds moved like slow memories. Birds flew uncertainly, as if unsure whether the air still belonged to them. Humanity woke knowing that whatever they chose today would echo forever. Dr. Elia Moreno stood on the roof of the observatory, wrapped in a thin coat against a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The air felt listened to. Every breath seemed noticed. "Are you still there?" she asked softly. The space before her shimmered. "We are always here," the Continuum replied. "But now, we are silent observers. You won't guide us anymore. Guidance ends when choice begins." Elia swallowed. "And if we fail?" A pause, longer than before. "Then you will not suffer." That frightened her more than any threat. Across the planet, humanity stood exposed. Without the illusion of privacy, people began to understand how much of their lives had been performance, for neighbors, for enemies, for history. Now there was no audience to impress, only a truth to face. Some people hid. Some prayed harder than they ever had. Others acted. In a coastal city drowning slowly beneath rising tides, citizens formed human chains to reinforce sea walls instead of fighting over evacuation routes. In a war-torn region, a commander walked unarmed into enemy territory and placed his weapons on the ground. He didn't speak. He simply waited. On social networks that somehow still functioned, lies collapsed faster than they could be spread. Not because they were censored, but because no one wanted to believe them anymore. For the first time, outrage felt exhausting. Not everyone chose light. There were riots, fires, attempts to seize power before it was too late. There were people who believed the Continuum was a lie, a trick, a test of obedience. They launched weapons. Nothing happened. The missiles vanished mid-air, dissolving into harmless light. A message appeared only for them. Force reveals fear. Fear cannot shape the future. Some fell to their knees. Others screamed. Dr. Marino sat inside the observatory, hands shaking as she recorded her final log. "If this ends us," she whispered, "I want someone, anyone, to know that we tried." Her screen flickered. "We know." A new presence joined the space around her. Not a voice this time, but a feeling, ancient, layered, vast. The continuum was not one mind. It was many. Civilizations long gone. Species that had faced the same moment and made different choices. Some had chosen conquest. Some isolation. Some unity. Only a few had chosen transformation. "We are not judges," they told her. "We are witnesses to possibility." She felt the truth of it press into her chest. "Then what decides our fate?" she asked. A simple answer came. "What you choose to become when no one is watching." Across Earth, something extraordinary began to happen. People stopped waiting. They didn't wait for orders, or approval, or permission. They acted. Hospitals opened their doors freely. Borders blurred as aid crossed without flags. Former enemies shared food, stories, grief. Not because they were told to. Because they wanted to. And for the first time, the change felt real. The sky began to brighten, not with sunlight, but with clarity. The timer ticked down. 3 hours. In homes and streets and shelters, people held hands. Some cried. Some laughed softly. Some simply sat in peace. A child somewhere asked, "Are they going to leave us?" Her mother answered honestly, "I don't know." Dr. Marino felt something shift, not in the sky, but in herself. "We're afraid," she said to the unseen presence. "But we're trying to be better." The reply came gently. "That is the beginning of wisdom." The stars rearranged themselves again, forming something new, not a symbol, not a message, but a door. Not opening. Waiting. The final hour began. Humanity stood before its reflection, unsure if it would be accepted or simply remembered. And somewhere beyond time, the continuum prepared to make a choice they had not made in millions of years. The final hour did not roar. It breathed. A low, almost tender hum spread across the planet, like the universe exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The sky softened, colors blending into something beyond blue or gold, a tone that felt like memory rather than light. The countdown reached its last 60 minutes. And the world waited. Dr. Elia Marino stood alone on the observatory roof, her hair lifted gently by a wind that carried no temperature. She felt smaller than ever before, yet strangely unafraid. "Is this it?" she whispered. "The moment we pass or fail?" The presence did not answer immediately. When it did, the voice was quieter than ever. "This is the moment we remember why we once failed." The air around her shimmered, and suddenly she was no longer on Earth. She stood in a vast emptiness filled with echoes, not sound, but experience. Shapes drifted like ghosts of civilizations long gone. Worlds that had burned themselves out. Species that had conquered entire galaxies and still collapsed inward. Each carried the same mark. Fear. "We were like you," the continuum said. "We believed survival meant dominance. That safety required control." Images flowed. Starfleets devouring resources, planets stripped bare, entire species erased in the name of security. "We won every war," the voice continued, "and lost everything that made us worth saving." Elia felt tears fall, though she did not know whose sorrow they belonged to. "You're afraid of us," she realized. "Not because we're weak, but because we're becoming what you were." The silence that followed was confirmation. Back on Earth, time thickened. People felt memories that weren't theirs, the final days of alien worlds, the quiet after extinction, the unbearable loneliness of survival. For the first time, humanity understood what immortality without meaning felt like. A mother in Mumbai whispered, "I don't want to live forever if it means being alone." A scientist in Seoul murmured, "Progress without compassion is just speed toward nothing." Across the planet, hearts shifted. The sky split open, not violently, but gently, revealing a structure so vast it bent perspective itself. The continuum revealed its true form. Not ships. A presence woven from countless consciousnesses, layered across time. A living archive of every species that had failed its final test. They were not gods. They were survivors. And they were tired. "We came to judge you," they said. "But we also came seeking hope." The confession rippled through every mind. "We have watched 1,000 worlds choose power over care. We are weary of carrying their echoes alone. Dr. Moreno stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. Then don't carry them alone anymore.
The continuum paused.
We don't know how not to.
She swallowed. Then let us help.
Not by being perfect, but by being together. Silence fell, the kind that precedes a choice that reshapes history. The countdown reached its final minute. 1 minute. Across the planet, people felt the same pull, a sense of standing on a threshold, of being asked not for greatness, but for honesty.
No one was asked to swear loyalty. No one was promised salvation. Only this.
Will you carry one another? In hospitals, doctors held hands with patients they could not save. In prisons, guards unlocked doors and sat beside those inside.
In war zones, soldiers laid down weapons and knelt in the dust. Not everywhere. Not everyone.
But enough.
Enough to matter.
10 seconds.
The sky pulsed.
5 seconds. Time slowed to a heartbeat. 1 second. Everything went still.
Then, the countdown vanished. The sky did not collapse. The world did not end.
Instead, a single message echoed through every mind. Judgment complete. Dr. Moreno gasped as warmth flooded the air, not heat, but presence. You're staying, she whispered. No, the continuum replied gently. We are changing.
A pause. And so are you.
The sky cleared.
Stars returned to their proper places.
The sun rose as it always had, ordinary, beautiful, fragile.
But something fundamental had shifted.
The universe felt closer. That night, people dreamed of futures they had never imagined before.
Not of conquest. Not of escape. But of care. Of stewardship.
Of choosing, again and again, to be better than they had been. And somewhere beyond sight, the continuum began to fade, not in retreat, but in trust. Leaving humanity with the greatest burden of all. The responsibility to become what they had proven they could be. The morning after the judgment felt unreal. The sun rose the same way it always had, casting gold across oceans and rooftops, mountains and streets.
Birds sang.
Winds moved.
Cities breathed.
And yet, everyone knew the world had changed. Not because something had been taken away,
but because something had been returned. There were no messages in the sky anymore. No voices in the mind. No glowing symbols. The continuum was gone.
But its absence felt louder than its presence ever had. Dr. Elia Moreno woke on the observatory floor, stiff and disoriented. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream. But then she saw it, a faint imprint in the air, like the afterimage of a star burned into reality.
She stood slowly.
They trusted us, she whispered. Her console flickered to life, not with alien code, but with human systems reconnecting across the globe.
Satellites realigned. Communications stabilized. Power grids synchronized without conflict.
The world was waking up together. Across continents, people stepped outside, uncertain of what to do next. There were no instructions.
No commandments.
No divine proclamations.
Just a quiet question hanging in the air. Now what?
In some places, the answer came slowly. Governments held emergency meetings that felt strangely calm.
There was less shouting. More listening.
Leaders spoke not of dominance, but of responsibility. For the first time in generations, treaties were drafted without hidden clauses. In others, the change was smaller but deeper. A woman apologized to her sister after 20 years of silence. A man quit a job that fed his anger and took one that fed his soul.
Children asked questions adults no longer pretended to know the answers to. The world did not become perfect. But it became honest. News outlets struggled to name what had happened. Some called it the awakening.
Others called it the day of silence.
A few, quietly, called it Judgment Day. But no one could deny the shift.
Crime dropped, not vanished, but softened. Conflicts cooled, not ended, but questioned. Greed lost its sharp edge, replaced by something unfamiliar, restraint.
It wasn't peace. It was possibility.
Dr. Moreno was invited to speak before a global assembly, not of governments, but of people. Teachers, engineers, artists, farmers, soldiers, healers. Representatives chosen not by power, but by trust. She stood before them, nervous and tired. They didn't leave us instructions, she said. They left us responsibility.
Faces watched her closely.
We asked them to save us, she continued. They refused. Because being saved means never learning how to save ourselves. Silence followed, not empty, but thoughtful. They believed we could become more, she said softly. And now we have to decide if they were right. Not everyone agreed. There were those who mourned the loss of certainty, who wanted the aliens back, wanted guidance, wanted rules. Some formed movements demanding humanity call them again. Others feared the responsibility and retreated into isolation or denial. The world was still human, messy, divided, uncertain. But something fundamental had shifted in its direction. One night, months later, Dr. Moreno stood beneath the stars again. She no longer searched for signs. She simply looked. For the first time in her life, the universe did not feel like a silent void. It felt like a listener. She whispered into the night, not expecting an answer. "We're trying." The stars did not respond. But she smiled anyway. Far beyond human sight, beyond time's familiar flow, the continuum watched. Not as judges, not as guardians, but as witnesses to a fragile, beautiful experiment. One of them spoke, not aloud, but in shared understanding. "They may fail." Another answered, "Yes." A third added, "But they may also surprise us." And for the first time in their long existence, hope, true hope, was no longer something they studied. It was something they felt. The universe moved on. And humanity, imperfect and uncertain, moved with it. Not because they were chosen, but because they chose themselves. The first test came quietly. No warning. No cosmic sign. No voice from the sky. Just a choice, small, human, and devastating in its simplicity. It began with a discovery. Deep beneath the melting ice of Antarctica, researchers uncovered something impossible. A structure not made by human hands. It was ancient, older than recorded history, older than civilization itself. Smooth and dark, shaped like a ring broken in half, humming faintly with dormant energy. Inside it, they found a message. Not from the continuum. From humanity. Dr. Elia Moreno stood among the ice and machinery, staring at the symbols carved into the alien alloy. They were unmistakable. Human languages. Thousands of them. Sumerian, Sanskrit, Latin, Mandarin, Arabic, English. Tongues long dead and still living, layered, overlapping, intentional. This is impossible," someone whispered. Elia shook her head slowly. "No. It's inevitable." The message was translated within hours. It was a warning. To those who find this. We were you. We failed. And we left this behind so you might not. The room fell silent. The message explained what the continuum truly was. They were not a single species. They were the aftermath of many. Civilizations that had reached the same threshold humanity had just crossed, and failed to change. They had tried to preserve themselves by merging, abandoning individuality in exchange for survival. They became observers because they no longer trusted themselves to act. They had been human once. Or something close enough to make no difference. "They didn't just judge us," Elia whispered. "They were judging themselves." The structure activated, projecting images into the air. Fragments of ancient Earths, alien worlds, technologies abandoned mid-creation. And then, a final message. "If you are reading this, it means you have not yet become us. Do not follow our path. We survived, but we lost ourselves." News of the discovery spread like wildfire. The world reacted in waves. Some felt betrayed. Some felt terrified. Some felt relieved. If the continuum had once been like humanity, then maybe perfection was never the goal. Maybe growth was. Debate erupted. Should humanity use the alien technology left behind? Should it be studied, destroyed, or sealed away forever? The old arguments returned. Power versus restraint, safety versus curiosity. But this time, something was different. People listened. Not everyone agreed, but fewer shouted. Fewer dehumanized. More paused before speaking. The echo of judgment still lingered. A global council was formed, not of nations, but of disciplines. Scientists sat beside philosophers. Engineers beside poets. Soldiers beside healers. They called it the Assembly of Continuance. Dr. Moreno was asked to speak again. She stood before them and said, "This isn't about whether we can use what they left behind. It's about whether we should." A young engineer asked, "What if not using it means falling behind? What if someone else uses it first?" Elia nodded. That fear built the world we almost lost.
Silence followed. Then, slowly, hands lowered. The decision came after days of debate. The technology would not be activated. Not yet. Not until humanity could prove it no longer needed fear to guide its choices. The artifact was sealed again, not buried, but watched over. A reminder, not a temptation. Life went on. Slowly, messily, but with intention. Borders softened. Not erased, but reimagined. Education shifted from competition to understanding. Children were taught not just how to survive, but how to care. There were still conflicts. Still mistakes. Still grief. But something subtle had changed. When people failed, they tried to repair instead of destroy. Years passed. The story of the judgment became history, then myth, then lesson. Children grew up hearing not of alien gods, but of a moment when humanity looked at itself and chose not to look away. Dr. Elia Marino grew old beneath a sky that felt less empty than it once had. On her final night, she stood where it had all begun, gazing at the stars. "We're still trying," she whispered. And for the first time since the continuum had departed, something answered. Not in words, but in warmth, in connection. In the quiet certainty that the universe was still listening, time moved forward, as it always did, quietly, patiently, without concern for hope or regret. Centuries passed. Humanity changed, not in leaps of conquest, but in layers of understanding. Cities grew upward and inward. Technology no longer chased dominance but harmony. Machines learned to listen before acting. Knowledge was shared not as power, but as responsibility. And yet, beneath all progress, one question never fully disappeared. Had humanity truly changed, or merely learned to behave better? The universe watched. Not as a judge. Not as a guardian. But as a witness waiting for truth to reveal itself. Beyond the edges of mapped space, humanity encountered something new. Not a civilization. Not a signal. A scar. A region of space where physics bent inward, where time folded over itself like a wounded memory. Ships that approached it returned altered, crews older or younger than when they left, messages arriving before they were sent. Scientists named it the Veil. It pulsed with a familiar resonance. The same signature as the ancient artifact buried beneath Earth. The same echo as the continuum. A council was formed once more, not out of fear, but necessity. Humanity now spanned dozens of worlds. They had learned restraint, but also confidence. They had learned that fear, left unexamined, always returned wearing a new mask. Dr. Elia Marino was long gone, but her words remained etched into every academy. Progress without humility becomes conquest. A new generation stood ready to face the unknown. Among them was Arne Solis, a historian-engineer raised on the stories of Judgment Night. He had never known a world without that shadow, and that hope. He stood aboard the Horizon's wake, the first ship designed not to conquer space, but to understand it. As the ship approached the Veil, instruments failed one by one. Then, silence. Not emptiness. Recognition. The Veil responded. A presence emerged, fragmented, unstable, ancient. Not the continuum. Something that had been left behind. "We are what remains," the presence whispered. "The ones who could not let go." Arne felt the truth strike deep. These were fragments of civilizations that had failed the test, not erased, but trapped in the moment of their fear. They had clung to power, to certainty, to themselves. And in doing so, they had fractured reality itself. "We watched your judgment," the fragments said. "We envied your mercy." Arne swallowed. "Why reveal yourselves now?" "Because you are approaching the same choice we once faced." Images flooded the bridge, visions of humanity's future, expansion, mastery, control. Colonies becoming empires. Guardians becoming rulers. "We wanted to be eternal," the fragments whispered. "And in trying to preserve ourselves, we became nothing." The crew stood in silence. Arne felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. "What do you want from us?" he asked. The answer was simple. "Do not become us." The veil began to collapse, not violently, but like a wound finally allowed to heal. The fragments faded, leaving behind one final gift. Knowledge. Not technology. Understanding. The understanding that every civilization reaches a moment where it must choose between being right and being kind. Between control and connection. Between survival and meaning. The Horizon's wake returned home.
Humanity listened.
Not with fear. With humility.
They dismantled weapons they no longer needed.
They placed limits on expansion. They chose stewardship over dominion. Not perfectly,
but consciously. And somewhere beyond time, the Continuum watched, not as judges, not even as witnesses,
but as kin.
They had hoped.
And now, they believed. The universe did not end.
It opened, time did not end.
It softened.
Civilizations rose and fell as they always had, but now they did so with memory, not just of their past, but of their responsibility.
Humanity did not become perfect. It became aware. And that made all the difference. Centuries passed.
Stars were reached, not conquered. Worlds were settled, not claimed. Life was studied with reverence, not hunger. Humanity learned to listen before touching, to understand before shaping. The great lesson of the judgment endured.
Power without care destroys itself.
And so, when humanity finally reached the edge of the observable universe, it did not arrive as explorers seeking ownership, but as students seeking understanding. At the boundary where space curved into silence, something waited.
Not the continuum. Not the veil. Something older. Something patient.
It had watched the universe form, watched stars die, watched civilizations bloom and fade like sparks in the dark. And now, it watched humanity. A vessel drifted forward. Not metal, not machine, but grown from living matter, shaped by thought and harmony. Inside it stood a council of humans, not leaders, not warriors, but storytellers, scientists, philosophers, and children.
They had come not to ask permission, but to listen. The presence stirred. It did not speak in words.
It remembered. And in that remembering, humanity felt something vast acknowledge them.
Not as subjects. Not as threats. But as kin in becoming.
The presence showed them the universe as it truly was, not empty, not cold, but unfinished.
Creation was not a single act. It was an ongoing conversation.
Every choice added a line to the story. Every act of compassion reshaped the ending. Humanity understood then what the continuum had always known. The universe does not test civilizations to judge them. It tests them to see if they are ready to join it.
Not as rulers. Not as saviors. But as caretakers of becoming.
The presence offered no gift.
No technology.
No promise of immortality. Only a question, older than stars. Will you help us keep the story alive? Humanity answered, not with words, but with action.
With patience.
With restraint. With curiosity. With love, imperfect and real. And so the universe changed, not with explosions or miracles, but with trust.
Stars burned a little warmer.
Darkness felt less empty. Time itself seemed to breathe easier. Far in the future, when humanity itself had transformed beyond flesh and form, they would look back on that night, the night the aliens did not invade, and understand it for what it truly was.
Not a judgment. Not a test. But an invitation. An invitation to grow up.
And somewhere, in the quiet between galaxies, the universe smiled, if such a thing can be said to smile, knowing that for the first time in its endless existence,
it was not alone in caring what came next.